is in the same book, number 218. Number 218.
Good afternoon to everyone. When I had the idea of, I had 1 Corinthians 13, the chapter, a number of months ago, and there was so much in it that I decided to go ahead and individually go through some of the attributes of love. And I really didn't stop to think about what some of these attributes really are. I mean, it's easy to read through the list, and you know, love is patient, love is kind, and it's almost poetic. We could just read through them, and it's hard sometimes to really grasp the significance of some of these things. So far, we've talked about patience and kindness and envy, and we're up to boasting, but since it is so closely related to pride, I'm going to go ahead and include two together. This is a tough one because the Bible has a lot to say about pride, so that's not the issue. The issue really is, and we really all know that pride is wrong, and we know that we should be an humble people and not have pride. But the problem is, it seems like we're faced with pride and potentially in every accomplishment we have, or whatever things we're good at. If we're not careful, we begin to think too much of ourselves. We begin to lean on our own understanding and do stuff our way and all that. And frankly, I probably wouldn't have talked about this topic if it hadn't been in the list and kind of snuck up on me just because it is a really tough. It's a really tough one to grasp it and present it in such a way that I guess would be helpful. One of my first questions had to do with what does pride have to do with love? I mean, obviously, patience and kindness are very closely related to love and comprised of love. Envy is also understandable, but what does pride have to do with love? But then I remembered a book that I read a number of years ago by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity, and he has a whole chapter on there in that book on pride. He called it the great sin. And I just want to read a little bit of what a few excerpts out of that book, and I think it'll help all of us to understand how pride relates to love. Pride is he says pride is competitive by its very nature. It gets no pleasure out of doing something, only out of having more of it than the next man. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they are not. They are proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. It is the comparison that makes you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. So that kind of helped me to understand it because it's essentially competitive. You know, we don't have anything to be proud about until we start comparing ourselves to other people. And then, you know, we sometimes feel like maybe we have a better this into three basic points. And one of the first one I want to talk about is Satan's fall. He actually fell because of pride, and we're going to kind of bring up a few passages and show how that happened. And then the Bible has much to say about pride, and there are many warnings against it, and we're going to go over some of those. And then finally, we're going to end up with how some other passages that tell us how to overcome pride. Of course, there's some overlap. Many of these passages will speak about, they'll have a warning, and they'll also give us a solution or a help. There are hundreds of passages in the Bible about pride, and I'm only going to take a few tonight. So there's a really interesting passage in Luke, and it only appears in Luke. It's not in the other Gospels. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. He told them, oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Let me... Well, I guess I was. He told them, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Go, I am sending you out like lambs among wolves. The 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even demons submit to us in your name. He replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I have given you the authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. So, this is a really interesting passage because it's like out of the blue, Jesus sends these 72 men out, and I skipped a few verses, but he sends them out 2 by 2. But there in verse 3, he says, I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. And then he relates how that in verse 17, they returned with joy. They were all excited about what they had discovered, that even the demons were submitting to them. And that was when Jesus told them, he said, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. And I think he was basically telling them, I understand how treacherous Satan is, and sending you guys out among all this wickedness is really scary. So I'm going to give you power to be able to perform miracles and cast out demons and that sort of thing. But it was very serious whenever Satan fell. He also explains to them that because Satan fell and because of Jesus' power, they can overcome the power of the enemy. There's more information about Satan's fall over in Isaiah, beginning in chapter 14. He says, how you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the realm of the dead, to the depths of the pit. I want you to notice again and again what Satan is saying here. He says, I will ascend. I will rise. I will raise. I will set enthroned. I will ascend. I will make myself like the Most High. So Satan was not, he was not content to be subordinate to God, but he was a wonderful being and a perfect being, as we're going to see in the next passage. But he couldn't handle it. And that's one of the difficulties about, we're warned against riches, we're warned that, against the love of money. The problem becomes whenever we get things, whenever we have accomplishments, then we can begin to think that we are really something. And so it's really scary, because Satan, who was in heaven with God originally, it took him down. And finally, in Ezekiel 28, and beginning in verse 12, and then we'll skip down to verse 17, Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre, and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says, you are the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You are in Eden, the garden of God. So this is an interesting passage, because it's addressed to the king of Tyre, but there was no man that was in heaven, and so every commentary, every scholar that I read, they all agree that this was referring to Satan. And I probably should have put this one before the other one, because this talks about the seal of perfection, and he was full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. In verse 17, your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. For his heart to become proud, notice what happened. He was a beautiful and a perfect being, and he was also really smart and very wise, but his wisdom became corrupted because of his splendor. So that's what pride can do to us, and that's why we always have to be on guard, because things that are good, things that have been given to us, if we're not careful, we can begin to take credit for those things, and we can begin to think that we're too special, or we're more special than we really are. In Proverbs 6, beginning in verse 16, these are the things the Lord hates, yea, 7 are an abomination to him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that are swift in running to evil, a false witness who speaks lies, and one who sows discord among brethren. Notice which one tops the list. Is pride. And we don't want to do anything that God hates, things that are an abomination. So I want us to understand what a big deal it is and how serious pride is. When he noticed in Luke 14, beginning in verse 7, when he noticed how the guests took the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give this person your seat. Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, that when the host comes, he will say to you, friend, move up to a better place. Then you will be honored in the presence of all the other guests. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. So this is one of the way that things work. If we seek to make ourselves seem important, if we seek to put ourselves on a pedestal, time and time again, we see it happen that we get put down, just as he relates to in this reading. Pride, of course, is one of the three classes of sins: lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. And whenever Satan tempted Jesus, he tempted him with pride. In Matthew 4 and verses 5 to 7, then the devil took him to the holy city and had him stand on the highest point of the temple. "If you are the Son of God," he said, "throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Notice how that he challenged him. He said, "If you are the Son of God, then prove it." This was a temptation for Jesus, because this would have, he would have never been persecuted. He would have become, if he would have thrown himself off the temple and basically flew like Superman, then the people would have admired him. They would have looked up to him. They would have thought that was just great. So it was definitely a temptation. Can you imagine having this kind of capability and being challenged to prove it, but yet Jesus refused to do so? Because this was exactly what Satan was wanting to do. These temptations of Jesus were very real. Beforehand, Jesus had fasted for 40 days, and that's how important it was. That was how difficult it was for him. Next, we'll look at a few passages on overcoming pride. As we mentioned before, pride is one of the three major classes of sins. In 1 John 2, verses 15 through 17, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in him." So loving the world and the things that are in the world is the root of all these different evils, whether we lust after things having to do with fleshly things or things that we can see, but also the pride of life, and to be up on a pedestal and to be where people look up to us. All these things are will cause us to fall, but the key to overcoming that is to not be fond of the world. We need to be looking for a future home, and rather than putting down too deep roots, doing things in this world that would be such a temptation for us. In Jeremiah 9:23, it says, "Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, let not the mighty man boast in his might, let not the rich man boast in his riches." So, if you have wisdom, or if you have might, or if you have riches, the temptation is going to be to boast in those things. Even if you don't boast outwardly, just to think inwardly that, you're in some way superior to others. But notice what he says 3 times here: don't do it. And in other passages we're going to see, resist the devil and he will flee from us. But there will be a temptation to brag about our accomplishments or whatever possessions we might have, and we have got to brace ourselves and not allow ourselves to go down that path. In Philippians, the 2nd chapter, in verse 3, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. This will take care of pride if in humility we really think of others as being having more to offer than us. If we think we're the one that is on top of everything, then it's easy to become built up in pride. Skipping down to verse 12. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And notice in verse 13, it is God who is at work in you, both to desire and to work for his good pleasure. So, whatever talents or abilities or possessions that we've got in this life, whatever accomplishments that we have, the temptation is to want to take that on ourselves. And we may say to ourselves, well, I worked hard, I got up early and I worked late and I went to school and I've got all this experience, whatever it is. But notice in verse 13 it says, it is God who is at work in you both to desire and to work. So he even gives us the desire to do what's right. Everything that we might try to take as our own accomplishment, even down to our desire to do what's right, it's God that's working in us. We don't have any problem with pride as long as we understand that everything comes from God. In 2 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, verse 12, for we dare not make ourselves of a number or compare ourselves with some that commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. In our little introduction by C.S. Lewis, this was what he was talking about, where we have a tendency to compare ourselves to others. And at that point, there will always be people that, have more accomplishments than we do, but there are some that will have fewer. And so, no matter what, we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to others, because that can cause real problems. We tend to overlook the ones that, where we don't quite measure up, but we tend to maybe think too highly of ourselves in the areas that we're strong. In 2 Corinthians 12, beginning in verse 7, therefore, in order to keep me from being conceited, and this is the Apostle Paul, and even the Apostle Paul could have became conceited. He said, I was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. This is a really foreign concept. This does not seem to make sense. How can power be perfect in weakness? But yet, if you think about it, if we're feeling strong and we're full of accomplishments and things are going great, then how do we need God? If things are just wonderful and we're self-sufficient, we're independent, and we're able to do all these things, then we're not going to be leaning on God. So, in the case of the Apostle Paul, he was tremendously gifted, but yet God gave him a thorn in the flesh, and he refused to remove it. So there may be some things in your life that have plagued you maybe for years, and maybe it grieves you, and you would, some weakness that you have or some difficulty that just keeps coming up again and again. But one way to look at that, if it keeps you humble, is to be thankful for it. Because maybe you're not as successful as you would like to be, but yet, what if you had been really successful? Could it be handled? So we sometimes need to be thankful for the things that we struggle with, because they can keep us humble. In Proverbs 3 and verses 5 through 7, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So this is one of the huge keys to overcoming pride, is to trust in the Lord. Because if we trust in Him, then we're not trusting in ourselves. And we're acknowledging, as he goes on to say, we're acknowledging that, well, let me just finish reading. And lean not on your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct your path. So in whatever accomplishments we might have, and whatever blessings that we enjoy, we need to acknowledge that everything good comes from God. And so if we acknowledge Him and we give Him the credit, then we don't have a problem with pride, because we're giving God the credit. And he goes on to say, be not wise in your own eyes. So the minute that we begin thinking that we really know something, then that's when it starts to get dangerous. And of course, fear the Lord and depart from evil. Well, I got ahead of myself there. So for our final passage, I'd like to turn to 1 Peter 5, and we'll consider verses 5 through 9. In the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. So this is one of the keys to overcoming pride, is to be in submission to those who are younger. All of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another. So it's not just the young submitting to the elder, but it's all of us realizing that not setting ourselves up above, even in our mind, above anyone else. Because he goes on to say, God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. We sure don't want to be in a position where God is opposing us. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that He may lift you up in due time. Cast all your anxiety on Him, because He cares for you. So if we will humble ourselves and give God the credit, then He will lift us up when the time is right. And he goes on to say how important it is to be alert and of a sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls about like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour. So Satan is on the hunt, and he's just looking for some way to trip us up. And if he can get us thinking that we're self-sufficient, that we don't really need God, we can give it lip service, we can be at every service of the church, but yet, if in our mind we're not really depending on God, then we've got a problem, and we're easy prey for Satan. And then he concludes by saying, resist him standing firm in the faith. So that comes back to that other passage where 3 times he says, basically, don't do it, don't do it. And another passage talks about how if we resist Satan, he will flee. Because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kinds of sufferings. So we're not alone in the difficulties that we might face and in the temptations that we might have. But the key is to resist those temptations, because the devil, you know, he's used to just having his way, and he's very tricky, and he will get us if he can. Well, I hope these things were helpful and beneficial to you as they were to me. Just doing a study like this is humbling, because it causes me to realize how far that, you know, that I have to go as well. If there's one who would like to pray to the church, or if there's one who would like to become a member of the church, we would ask you to come as we stand and sing.